Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I am in my jammies. I have been working and doing various things all day, and I'm finally home and able to film this video. It is finally February, which means it is time to do my first monthly wrap-up of 2023, and I made it through 6 books this year, so I am on track for reaching my goal of 72 books in a year, which is 6 books a month. Very, very stoked on that, though I will say it was close and I almost didn't make it, but we pulled through at the end. As I mentioned in my last video, I do have a giveaway that I will be putting up on my channel today, or not on my channel, on my Instagram at Prynne. I will be giving away a brand new copy of Gone to See the Riverman and a used copy of Sheridan Le Fanu's Madame Crowl's Ghost and Other Stories, along with a bunch of fun little goodies as well. This giveaway will run for a week, so it's coming up on Thursday, and then I will announce the winner next Thursday. Ideally get the prize shipped out the following Friday. So for all details on how to enter that, just look at my Instagram at Prynne, and that will all be there for y'all. Without further ado now, let's dive into this wrap-up. I'm really excited because I started off the year with a 5-star read. I only had one 5-star read this month, but I had a lot of 4-star reads, so I was really, really, really thrilled with my first month, which is great because last year I started off, I think, with a 2-star read, so making some improvements. But my first read for the year was Brother by Anya Ahlborn. I do have an entire review of this book on my channel. And I just want to say huge, huge, huge thank you to every single person who recommended that I read this book. A lot of you have. This book was phenomenal. It is devastating. It is just absolutely bonkers, and it's the best thing I've read from Anya Ahlborn so far. This is the story of, like, I think he's 19 years old, something like that, like a young adult who was raised in a family, basically living out the Texas Chainsaw Massacre family story. It's very dismal. However, Anya Ahlborn does have a way of making a seemingly evil character extremely sympathetic. The primary story in this novel is all focused on the relationship between our main character Michael and his brother Rebel. Anya Ahlborn focuses a lot of her stories on the family dynamic, especially the dysfunctional family, and I think this does it the best because it takes the absolute most horrific and most dysfunctional type of family and just shows how that family navigates and what it would be like living in that situation. I think it's a really, really brilliant novel, albeit extremely disturbing. But this was a 5-star read for me. If you want to know my full thoughts on this, again, I do have a full review, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But by far the best thing I've read from Anya Ahlborn, and I highly, highly recommend it. Alright, next up was When the Night Bells Ring by Jo Kaplan. This was the second book featured in the Twisted Retreat monthly book box. I really, really enjoyed reading this. This is the story of Lavinia Kane, who is a woman in the late 1800s, traveling with her family during, like, I think, the gold rush of Nevada, I want to say. I know there were a lot of gold rushes, but I believe it's the Nevada one. They go and move into a silver mining town, and there are some evil creatures lurking about. The primary story takes place through diary entries of Lavinia that are then found by 2 of our main characters who are surviving kind of like a apocalyptic climate change, natural disaster, and are escaping like the California heat, travel through to Nevada, and somehow find themselves stuck in a cave where they discover Lavinia's diary and are trying to use the diary to figure out how to navigate out of the cave where these creatures from Lavinia's diary may or may not be inhabiting. I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. I don't necessarily love the frame story. I think there's some elements to the frame story that are very Descent-like, if you have seen that movie. And while it does create some very creepy and atmospheric moments, I think the shining quality of When the Night Bells Ring is absolutely Lavinia's story and Lavinia as a character. She is very much a flawed, an unreliable narrator, yet she seems to lean more towards the reliable side because she shows how almost unlikable she actually is without seeming to realize how negative some of her actions are. I do not believe Lavinia is supposed to be a likable character. I do not particularly like her as a person, but she's extremely interesting to read about, and I really loved reading about her time in the town, how she functions, and how she responds to these creatures. The creatures are freaking awesome. I really thought this was going to be kind of like a cheesy vampire novel when I first read the plot. I was like, oh, is there going to be like mole people like they are in The Descent, or it's going to be vampires? It's a little bit of both, I will say, without giving too much away. But they're very unique creatures. I've never really seen anything like them, and I thought they were fantastic to read about, and I really, really, really enjoyed this book. It was a 4-star read for me just because the frame story did feel a little forced. And I was very much concerned primarily with Lavinia and less with Wainoka and Mads, who are our two main characters in the frame story. But I was very impressed with Jo Kaplan's work, and I thought her creature feature writing was fantastic. Okay, book number 3. This book was so much longer than I thought it was going to be. It's like almost 600 pages. But this is A Child Alone with Strangers by Philip Fracassi. So many people have been telling me to get up on the Fracassi train, and I'm so glad that I did. This is the story of Henry. He is a little boy who suffers a horrible accident when he's about 9 years old, and somehow seemingly gains, I don't want to say telekinetic or psychic, some kind of brain wave power that allows him to see into the sort of minds of other people. Yeah, let's go with that. Completely separately, he is kidnapped and held for ransom. So the story is a strange mashup of his survival story alongside of the detective story of trying to rescue him, with kind of a cosmic horror twist thrown in between all of that. I did really, really enjoy this story. It's very unique. I've never read anything like it. It is a very interesting spin on like a coming of age tale. I do have a full review on this book, as well as When the Night Bells Ring. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. But this is very, very original, which is something that I feel like I don't actually say that often, because I feel like I read a lot of books that are unique spins on cliche ideas pretty frequently. This is something that I've never really read before, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I believe it was Fracassi's like first fully published novel. There are definitely some character development issues, and the book does run a little bit longer than I think it should. But for the most part, I really loved the entirety of the story. I really loved Henry as a character. He was a very well-developed and strong character. All of our villains, while evil, have some sort of merit to them that makes them compelling to read about, which I think is very difficult, especially when you have 5 major villains. 6 technically, if you count like the cosmic entity. And for being a quasi-semi cosmic horror story, which is something that I normally don't like, I actually really liked the way that Fracassi did his cosmic angle, because it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like this strange, overwhelming existential dread that showed up at the very, very end. It was very much present from the beginning, albeit that existential dread does show up towards the end, and that was the only part of the novel that I had a real issue with from like a story perspective. I will say, and I said this in my review, there is animal cruelty featured in this novel. I found it readable. I was able to get through it. It's definitely several pages long. I wish it wasn't in there. It's not overly graphic at all, but it does involve dogs, and I wasn't thrilled that it was in there. But it did not ruin the story, and it would not stop me from recommending the book to people, because it is not super graphic. I do wish that it wasn't present, but again, it's not graphic. So for those reasons, this was a 4-star read for me, but I cannot wait to read more from Fracassi, because I really did love his writing style. Okay, next up, I then read Christopher Golden and Tim Labon's Festival, which is illustrated by Peter Bergting. This is really interesting. This is kind of a, almost like a Fire Festival story. It's this, like, music festival, this like big like cliche like gov ball music festival that takes place on a sacred Viking sacrificial ground or like death mound, something like that. And the Viking spirits kind of overtake the festival and chaos ensues is kind of how I would describe this book. It's interesting. I felt like it was a little too short to pretty much fit all of what it wanted to fit in this the space that it had. I felt that I had a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of things were just kind of like thrown at me and I was supposed to accept them. There was a lot of beginning of character developments and story developments that never really went anywhere because the novel was so short. And I really wish it had leaned more into Viking lore because I feel like that really would have pulled all of this together. That being said, the imagery is really, really freaking cool. The illustrations also greatly benefit from them. And it was fun to read, but at the end of the day, I think this was a 3-star read for me just because I really wanted more. And I know I've read Christopher Golden before, so I know that he can do a lot more. So I was just a little let down at how much was introduced and then not followed up on. So 3 stars for me. If you like Christopher Golden, absolutely give this a chance. I read it in like a day. It's really fast, really simple, and a really, really cool concept that I just wish was expanded on because it created more unanswered questions than it should have. So that's really my only complaint with that. Okay, so then I read, and I also have a full review on this book on my channel. This is Little Eve by Catriona Ward. So I picked this up because I liked Last House on Needless Street, really enjoyed Sundial, so I was really excited to see the third release, a third release from Catriona Ward. Unfortunately, this book was actually written before both of those novels, and sadly, it feels like it. This is the story about a girl named Eve in the early 1900s who is raised in a cult that lives in a castle on an isle off of like rural Scotland. This novel I felt like could have been set anywhere. Like the fact that it was in rural Scotland I thought was really appealing. However, that actual setting really didn't do much to drive this plot forward. This is a very generic cult tale with a very unreliable narrator. It gets very vague in the depravity that happens with the cult. So there's some heavy implications of what's going on, but it is not necessarily fleshed out in a way that makes it palatable for the reader, if that makes sense. Like, it's very hard to understand exactly what's going on. This novel felt very, very confusing. There's a lot of time jumps, a lot of different perspectives thrown at you. And there's like 2 chapters that are actually written as letters, but you don't realize that they're letters until like 30 pages in or something like that. So I don't know. It felt very all over the place, very clunky, very first draft. And I just couldn't vibe with any of the characters. And because the writing was so difficult to kind of navigate through and understand exactly what was going on, I just ended up not really caring about any of the major characters either. I felt a lot of characters were developed to initially go in one direction, and then Catriona Ward, for some reason, had them do a full 180 and took them in a completely different direction with no explanation at all. And so I just felt that it was very difficult to get through. There is like a detective element to this story. I did very much enjoy Detective Christopher Black. I thought he was really cool, and I would have loved to see more from him, and I felt that he was underused as a character, and that our main character, Eve, was almost overused, and her narration and her perspective really made this book tricky to navigate because Catriona Ward was trying very hard to use that character as a way to blindside the reader to all of the twists, and it just made everything feel messy instead. So that was a 3-star read from me. If you're a Catriona Ward fan, it's worth reading. If you're debating reading it, it's one that I think you could skip. And then last but not least, I love the fashion world, I love the fashion industry, and I was really interested to read Coco Chanel, The Illustrated World of the Fashion Icon by Megan Hess, primarily because I am very interested in the company that is Chanel, and I just love that there are all these like beautiful illustrations in this. I know that Coco Chanel is a controversial figure. I know that she has done many questionable things that didn't quite come to light when she was living, and this book does not talk really about any of that, which I was a little bummed about, but this is more of a glorification of the designer and the brand as something that talks about the development of the brand. I thought I thought this book was very, very strong. It also talks a lot about Karl Lagerfeld, who is a designer that I do really like and appreciate. So as a history of the brand, I thought this was great. I love the artwork in it as kind of like a biography of Chanel. Not so much. I mean, this isn't necessarily a biography of Coco Chanel. It's more of like a visual guide to the stylings of the brand Chanel, and I thought that it did a very, very, very good job with that, and it is a stunning, stunning book, and the illustrations by Megan Hess are really, really cool, and if you're interested in the stylings of the Chanel brand, this is a great, great book to read for that. So yes, I will just leave it at that, because again, this is a horror channel, and I don't talk too much about my fashion reads on this channel. Every now and then I throw them in, but I will leave it at that. That was a 4-star read for me. Megan Hess's illustrations are absolutely beautiful, and I think the brand history of Chanel is very, very interesting. There are definitely some controversial things that are skipped over in this book, but from just a stylistic point of view, it's really interesting to see where the brand developed from. So that was great. Anyways, those were my 6 books for the month of January. We started off the year really, really strong. What was it, 2 3-star reads, which is great. The rest were all 4-star and then 1 5-star. Very, very, very satisfied with that. Hopefully February will keep up the pace. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah.